I have nowhere else to go.
You can stay here tonight. Come inside.
The night wind moved slowly across the wide, silent prairie, and the old ranch house stood alone. Under a sky full of cold stars inside the lonely house lived a rancher named Calder Vance, a man whose life had become quiet and empty after many hard years of work and loss. Every morning he rode across the dry fields, with his horse Rowan checking fences, feeding cattle, and listening only to the sound of wind and hooves. No laughter, no voices, only the long breath of the plains people in the nearby town spoke of Calder as a man made of stone, not cruel but distant like a mountain that watched the world without speaking. Calder believed that was true, because after his parents died and the ranch became his burden, he slowly forgot what it felt like to share warmth with another Sioux. In a bitter evening near the end of autumn, Calder returned from the fields earlier than usual because clouds rolled across the sky and the air smelled like coming snow. As he opened the wooden gate, he noticed a small figure walking along the road that led toward his ranch. The figure moved slowly, carrying a worn travel bag and wrapped in a thin coat that looked far too light for the freezing wind. Calder watched with quiet curiosity because few strangers ever came this far from town. When the traveler reached the edge of the yard, Calder saw that the figure was a young woman with tired eyes and dust on her boots. Her name was Elira Dawes, though Calder did not know that yet. Elira stood there trembling slightly and looking at the ranch house with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She had traveled across miles of empty land chasing a promise that had turned into silence. Weeks earlier, she had answered a letter from a rancher seeking a mail order bride, believing it might offer her a new life far from the crowded eastern cities. But when she arrived in the town, she learned the man who sent the letter had died suddenly, and the people who knew of the arrangement only shrugged their shoulders, leaving her stranded with no money and no home. When Calder approached, Elira gathered her courage and spoke softly, saying that she needed shelter only for one night, because the storm would soon arrive and she had nowhere else to go. Calder looked at her for a long moment, studying the exhaustion in her face, the cold trembling in her hands, and something inside him shifted like a door opening after years of being closed. He was not used to visitors, and the thought of another person under his roof felt strange. Yet the prairie taught a simple rule, that no traveler should be turned away into the dark wind. So Calder nodded once and told her she could stay until morning. Inside the ranch house, the fire crackled warmly and the smell of wood smoke filled the air. Elira sat near the hearth holding a cup of hot tea that Calder prepared with awkward care because he rarely served anyone except himself. The quiet between them felt heavy but not uncomfortable, like to strangers standing at the edge of a long road, neither sure which direction to take. Calder noticed how carefully Elira looked around the house, as if measuring every corner to be certain she was safe. The ranch house was simple, built from old timber with a wide table, rough chairs, and shelves filled with tools, maps, and books about land and weather. Elira told Calder about the letter that had brought her west and the long train ride that carried her farther from the life she once knew. She explained that she had no family left and had believed marriage to a rancher would give her a place to belong. But fate had erased that plan before she even arrived. Calder listened quietly, his face calm, but inside his thoughts moved slowly like the deep river that ran beyond the hills. He understood loneliness better than most people, because it had followed him for years like a silent shadow. Hearing Elira say she had nowhere else to go stirred an unfamiliar feeling in his chest, something between sympathy and recognition. Outside, the wind grew stronger, rattling the wooden shutters and sending snow swirling across the fields. The storm arrived sooner than expected, covering the prairie in white silence. Calder realized that even if Elira wanted to leave in the morning, the roads might be impossible to travel for days. Yet he said nothing about that, because he did not wish to trap her under his roof. She was a stranger after all, and strangers carried stories that could be dangerous or heartbreaking later. That night Calder prepared a small room that once belonged to his younger sister long ago. Before life scattered his family across time and distance, Alira thanked him with quiet sincerity. And before closing the door, she looked at Calder with eyes that carried both gratitude and deep uncertainty. She repeated the words that had followed her across the plains, "I have nowhere else to go," and Calder answered gently that for tonight this ranch was an oath. Storm raged through the night, burying fences and roads beneath heavy snow, while inside the ranch house a strange calm settled over the two lonely souls who had crossed paths by accident. Alira slept deeply for the first time in many nights, while Calder remained awake, sitting near the fire staring into the glowing embers. As he wondered why fate had placed her on his road for years, Calder believed his life would continue the same quiet pattern. Endless work, endless silence, endless distance from the world, yet the presence of Alira even in the next room changed the rhythm of the house. He heard the soft creak of the floorboards when she moved and the gentle breathing through the wall. And those small sounds reminded him that loneliness was not the natural state of a human heart. As dawn approached, the storm slowly faded, leaving the prairie buried in shining white snow. Calder stepped outside and looked across the endless fields where the sun began to rise like a pale gold coin above the horizon. He realized the roads would remain blocked for several days, perhaps longer, and when he returned inside, he found Alira already awake, standing near the window watching the snow. With a worried expression, when Calder explained the situation, Alira lowered her eyes, uncertain what to say, because staying longer might feel like an unwanted burden. Yet she had no other choice. Calder sensed her hesitation and told her calmly that the ranch had plenty of work and plenty of space, and if she wished she could remain until the roads opened again. Alira looked at him in surprise, because she had expected suspicion or impatience, but instead she saw quiet kindness. In his steady gaze that morning marked the beginning of a change neither of them expected, though at the time it seemed like nothing more than a simple act of shelter between strangers on a frozen prairie. The days after the storm unfolded slowly across the silent ranch. Calder returned to his routines, but now Alira moved beside him, learning the rhythm of ranch life. She helped prepare meals, mend clothing, and organize supplies, while Calder showed her how to feed the cattle and gather wood for the long winter nights. At first their conversations were brief, careful exchanges shaped by mutual respect, yet as the snow melted and sunlight returned, their words grew easier. Calder discovered that Alira possessed a thoughtful spirit and a quiet strength that allowed her to endure hardship without bitterness, while Alira saw beneath Calder's reserved nature a deep sense of loyalty and patience that had been hidden under years of solitude. On evening, while they repaired a broken fence near the edge of the property, Alira asked Calder why he never married despite owning such a vast ranch. Calder paused before answering, because the truth was tangled in memories of responsibility, loss, and fear. He explained that after his parents died, he focused only on protecting the land that had been in his family for generations, and somewhere along that path, he forgot how to build a life beyond work. Alira listened with gentle understanding and admitted that she once believed marriage could solve loneliness, but her journey had taught her that belonging cannot be forced by letters or promises. It must grow slowly like roots beneath the soil. Calder nodded thoughtfully, realizing her words carried a quiet wisdom. As weeks passed, the ranch no longer felt like a place of temporary shelter. It became a shared world where laughter sometimes echoed through the rooms, and the lonely silence that once filled the house faded into memory. Calder began to notice small details about Alira, the way she hummed softly while cooking, the determined look on her face when learning new tasks, and the warm kindness she showed even to the animals on the ranch. Alira also saw changes in Calder. The rigid distance he once carried began to soften, and occasionally she caught him smiling at simple things like the playful running of young calves across the field. Their friendship deepened with every passing day, until both of them sensed that the bond between them was becoming something stronger. Though neither dared to name it out loud, on quiet evening they sat outside watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Alira finally spoke the thought that had been resting in her heart. She said that when she first arrived, she believed her journey had ended in failure, but now she felt grateful because the road had led her to a place where she discovered unexpected kin. Nescalder looked across the fields and then back at her, and he realized that the emptiness he carried for so long had slowly disappeared during the weeks she spent at the ranch. Without planning it, without forcing it, they had built something real. When spring arrived, the prairie awakened with green grass and wild flowers, and the roads once again connected the ranch to the distant towns. One morning Alira packed her travel bag because she believed it was time to decide her future. She thanked Calder for his generosity and explained that she would travel to the nearest town to search for work and begin a new life. Calder listened quietly, though the thought of the ranch returning to its old silence felt heavier than he expected. After a long pause, he spoke honestly, saying that the ranch had not felt like home for many years until she arrived, and if she wished she could remain, not as a guest, but as a partner in building a life on the land. Alira looked at him with astonishment, because the words carried more meaning than a simple offer of shelter. They carried trust, respect, and the promise of shared hope. Tears filled her eyes as she realized the long journey that began with uncertainty had finally led her somewhere real. She set down her travel bag and stepped closer to Calder. The wind moved gently through the tall grass, and the wide prairie seemed to breathe around them. Alira whispered that she once said she had nowhere else to go, but now she understood that sometimes the road brings a person exactly where they were meant to belong. From that day forward, the lonely ranch was no longer lonely, because two wandering hearts had found each other beneath the endless sky of the prairie, and together they built a life stronger than any storm that once threatened to tear them apart.